Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. Day on our calendar. I'm Greg Anthony here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And today I want to talk about a couple things, of course, regarding the Vatican-led New World Order, a discussion that's not met with kind ears to the mainstream media as well as much of the alternative media. And it struck me that I was looking around for stories and trying to trace all the people that follow this story or do connect the Vatican to the New World Order. And it's kind of like a small club. And the club shares information and it goes back and forth. And it was always my hope that this would grow by leaps and bounds over the years. And hopefully people will catch on. But today I want to talk about how I caught on to this story. And the main story that led me to do a lot of research in this area for a long period of time, ever since 1982. And we'll talk about that, as well as, isn't it interesting, when you talk about dictators in the world, the Vatican is usually behind them as their mentor. We'll get into that as well. So let's discuss the Vatican Bank scandal. And I was in Rome at the time when it occurred, and that's how I learned about the Vatican intrigue and the Jesuit intrigue, not knowing much about it till really this story hit. And let me look at this and talk about this scandal. The Bank of Ambrosiano was an Italian bank which collapsed in 1982. And like I said, I was in Rome when this occurred. At the center of the bank's failure was its chairman, Roberto Calvi, and his membership in the illegal Masonic Lodge, P2, or Propaganda Due. The Vatican Bank was Ambrosiano's main shareholder, and the death of Pope John Paul I in 1978 is not rumored, but was linked to the Ambrosiano scandal, giving one of the subplots of The Godfather Part 3. Remember that movie? Of course you do. The Vatican Bank was also accused of funneling covert United States funds to Solidarity and the Contras through Banco Ambrosiano. Now, Propaganda Due and the P2 Masonic Lodge. How many shows have we done on that? Many, many over the years. And Propaganda Due, or P2, was a Masonic lodge operating under the jurisdiction of the Grand Orient of Italy from 1945 to 1976, when its charter was finally withdrawn and a pseudo-Masonic or black or covert lodge operating illegally in contravention of the Italian constitutional laws banning secret lodges and membership of government officials in secret membership organizations from 1976 to 1981. Now, during the years that the lodge was headed by Licio Gelli, and we've talked about him many, many times, P2 was implicated in numerous Italian crimes and mysteries, including the nationwide bribe scandal called, there was one huge nationwide bribe scandal, the collapse of the Vatican Bank-affiliated Bank of Ambrosiano, and the murders of journalists Mino Pecorelli and banker Roberto Calvi. Now let's look back a little bit at who Calvi was. He was born in 1920, died in 1982, and was killed, was an Italian banker dubbed God's Banker by the press due to his close association with the Vatican. A native of Milan, Calvi was the chairman of the Banco Ambrosiano, which collapsed in one of modern Italy's biggest political scandals, and his death in London in June 1982 has been the source of enduring controversy. He was found hung under the Blackfriars Bridge. Calvi's death was ruled as murder after 2 coroner inquests and an independent investigation. And in June 2007, 5 people were acquitted of his murder after a trial in Rome. Claims have been made that Calvi's death involved the Vatican Bank, Banco Ambrosiano's main shareholder, the Mafia, which may have used Banco Ambrosiano for money laundering, and Propaganda Due and the P2 Masonic Lodge. Now, just to touch on Licio Gelli, you can go back to many of my shows. We did in-depth interviews, as well as interviewed people who were very close to Licio Gelli. Now, he was born in 1919. He's considered an Italian financier, chiefly known for his role in the Bank of Ambrosiano scandal. He was revealed in 1981 as being the venerable master of the clandestine Masonic Lodge Propaganda Due. Now, you can get a lot more of this information on Licio Gelli if you go to many of my old shows and talk about his involvement with the CIA as well as other covert organizations. And Licio Gelli was also at Ronald Reagan's inauguration. They were quite close, I'm told. But anyway, regarding P2, when I was there, a huge scandal erupted when over 150 high-level bishops, some cardinals, including Cardinal Paul Marcinkus, who we're going to talk about today, head of the Vatican Bank at the time of this scandal, were outed as being members of the P2 Masonic Lodge. Now, according to Vatican canon law, anyone who is a member of a Masonic Lodge is immediately excommunicated. However, in this case, the story received huge coverage in France and Italy. No one was ever excommunicated, and the story never seemed to make its way to American shores, and I can attest to that because I tried writing some things that would never get here and never be printed by either AP or UPI, the wire services at the time in Rome. Now, another story here, you got to understand this. Paul Marcinkus's connection to this scandal and to the murder of Roberto Calvi. Now, when I was there, I tried to interview Marcinkus after he was indicted by the Italian government for bank fraud, later airlifted by the American military to a archdiocese in Phoenix, where he lived until about, what was it, 2009? Maybe 8-9 years ago. I'm a little fuzzy on that, where he died. And I'll get into a little bit of a personal story on that end. But it was impossible to interview Marcinkus. He was flown out by the American military, protected from the Italian government because of Rome being, Vatican being a separate city-state. And in turn, it was learned that the Italian government was paid off over $225 million to eventually forget about the charges. However, the family of Calvi and the Italian government never did forget about the possibility of Marcinkus' connection to Calvi's murder. And even as late as less than 7 or 8 years ago, the case was reopened in Rome, and the Italian press and prosecutors were hot on Marcinkus' tail here, even coming to America to try to interview him. Now, while I was here in America, I did the same thing. I tried to get close and interview Paul Marcinkus, and at the time he was in a archdiocese in Phoenix. Closest I got was getting contact by one of his godson, who basically told me that Mr. Marcinkus was aware of the shows that I did about him and basically was a patsy. And that's what his godson said. Now, I didn't believe that, but I said, why don't we set up an interview with Mr. Paul Marcinkus, the good cardinal, and or archbishop, and he can clear his name, and I promise I will not print it or tell anything until he gives me the word okay to do that, even if it's after his death. Well, after I talked to his godson a number of times trying to set that up, Paul Marcinkus was found dead in his room, supposedly of natural causes. He was in his 80s. And that leads me to what I want to do right here real quickly before I explain a little bit more. But I was checking out the interview. I was checking out the internet on this story. And there's a neat little video, about 10 minutes long, regarding a guy who got caught up on this story as well. And he gives a 10-minute interview. It's called The War on Disinformation. And the interview is called The Vatican, the P2 Masonic Lodge, and the Mafia. It's part 2 of 5 parts he did. Maybe I can find part 3. And this is when he's driving in a golf cart trying to interview Marcinkus. Okay, and this must have been around the time I was trying to do it. Because Marcinkus was apparently still alive and not feeling well. This was in 2010. So that's still, Marcinkus was alive then, and I was looking to interview him myself. I was trying to set it up through the godson who had contacted me. And, you know, he definitely was a high-level connected person because he was trying to tell me all the time, Greg, you're way off base. Why are you doing these Vatican stories? No one's going to believe you. And let me tell you what's going to happen. Nobody's going to publish your stories. No one's going to put you on the air. You're going to go poor. And in the end, even the people that listen to you won't care. And you know something? He's right. But here's the story. Marcinkus is alive now. It's 2010. This guy's in a golf cart looking to find Paul Marcinkus. And I thought I'd play it for you. Brings back good memories. Here we go.
Archbishop, but to no avail. So that's why I'm out here looking for him in his hometown. Try his country club first. My disguise. I found out, though, that he gives a church service every week. They won't let me in with normal cameras. So there's nothing else for it. Time for a slightly smarter disguise. So, we've got these rather clever little glasses. I don't know if you can see them here. These glasses cameras. It goes on something like this. There we go. And I'm going to go to the church service, undercover, in the congregation, and just see if the Archbishop is there. And if he is there, then hopefully we'll get a chance to have a chat with him. These glasses, you see how they work? Look at that. It's just in the fridge here. They look as though they've just been broken, and I've taped them together like a real cheapskate. But they should work. They do have quite a lot of baggage with them, batteries and things like this, but if I put this, hopefully I won't get caught. There we go. And now we go off to see the Archbishop. Armed with my rather dashing spy glasses in Sun City, Arizona, I'm on the trail of the former head of the Vatican Bank, Archbishop Marcinkus, the man who links Calvi to the Pope and the Vatican. For years he's avoided the world's questions about the mysterious death of God's banker, Roberto Calvi. So I've gone to the church where Marcinkus preaches to see the man at work. It's packed. Marcinkus is clearly a popular priest. Calvi knew a lot of the Vatican Bank's secrets, and Marcinkus may hold the key to the mystery of his death.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, this is a Roman Catholic church. You're in the right place.
That's great, but who's this guy?
Asking you all to please keep our beloved Archbishop in your prayers as he continues to get well. Presiding this afternoon in the Archbishop's absence will be Father Caitlin. He'll be
So the Archbishop hasn't turned up for church.
On this feast day is to Jesus Christ, our Sovereign King. On page number 488, I'd like to encourage you all to stand, read those around you, and then read the message.
I never liked this hymn, so I made for the exit.
I thought I'd just put James toilet empty. It's very strange. Church to find. Man on the second path and maybe the entire.
Anyway, as I was about to say before I was interrupted, apparently the Archbishop's having routine tests, and that's why he's had to miss his service. I decided to ditch the disguise and speak to the parishioners instead. Could they tell me more about the man who might know something about Calvi's death?
Good afternoon.
Sorry to bother you. We're from British TV, and we came here to Arizona to try and meet Archbishop Marcinkus, but he's not well.
No, he isn't.
He's not very well, but I was wondering, I was just hoping to meet a few people who might know him, and just get their thoughts on what he's like as a priest, given that he was such a senior member within the Catholic Church.
He just doesn't pretend at all. He's naive in a lot of ways, you know, but he's very open and very funny and smart, and he's just a wonderful, wonderful person.
I just love him. I think he's terrific.
What's he like as a priest?
I know he's very down to earth. That's what I like about him. He talks to, he's a very special person, but he doesn't make you feel that he's better than everybody else. I call him a pope because he's that good.
Some people in Italy
Yes.
have been quite critical of the Archbishop.
Yes.
Are people upset about that? Do they know about the
They
criticism
know
of him?
about it, yes, but they don't accept it because they don't believe it, and I don't believe it either.
You don't believe that he's been connected with all these
No.
terrible activities?
No, I don't.
Because he's why would you say it? Because he's a
Because
poor person?
he's not that type of person to be connected with anything like that, so.
He was a sucker. You know, he believed other people, and it cost the Catholic Church and him, but he's been a great thing here.
The Archbishop has clearly won over the residents of Sun City. Apparently he's a bit poorly, but perhaps I can just see if he'll answer the door at his home. So this is the house of the Archbishop. We'll see if anybody's home. The Archbishop used to be nicknamed the Gorilla, but surely you won't hit a man wearing glasses. Well, there's a package here. See that Archbishop, His Excellency Archbishop Marcinkus. And then you can see the church here. And the welcome sign, but the very fact there's a package here, we suspect. Probably not here. Around the back, I could see his house wasn't exactly a mansion. Gosh, poor man. So that is the retirement home of the second most powerful man in the Catholic Church. Even his cacti need watering. Next day, still no sign of the Archbishop. So I tried the neighbours to see if they knew anything. It was the doorbell, it was. I'm sorry to bother you, sir. I don't know if you could hear that, but the neighbour was saying that he doesn't know where the Archbishop is, and his wife had wanted to make some chicken soup for him because he heard that he was poorly. The neighbour's only lived there for a year, so he doesn't really know the Archbishop, but he did say that the Archbishop's secretary has been over here from Rome recently, going through his books, and almost it sounded as if he was preparing his papers in the event that he dies. So it's possible that the Archbishop is going to take some of his secrets along with him. It was time to say goodbye to Sun City and my trusty golf cart, and focus again on Cowie's strange story. I needed to find other leads to get me to the truth of why he died. Perhaps the last months of his life would reveal some of his secrets. Everything really started to go wrong for Cowie when the debts at his bank spiraled out of control.
He was a secretive, paranoid man. Everything had to be kept secret. If it was released, it was dangerous. If more people knew a secret, it wasn't a secret anymore. I remember him being very, very nervous. At one point he said, "They're after me, it's them." He was always referring to they, and I said, "Well, who's they?" And he said, "I can't tell you, but they." And all through the interview, he was drumming his fingers on the top of the desk. And it was quite clearly a man under extreme stress.
It got worse. Cowie was arrested for currency fraud. During his time inside, he started to talk. He committed the ultimate banker's crime and began spilling his clients' secrets. With his bank facing financial collapse, Cowie now had every reason to flee Italy.
You look at his position at the beginning of 1982, he was out of prison basically on bail. He didn't have a passport, he wasn't allowed to leave the country. The moment of truth was approaching with all these little companies abroad because they were having to repay debts, meet financial obligations. They didn't have the money for it. The money had to be found from somewhere. He was desperate.
This is the road where Calvi lived in the centre of Rome. It's the last place he was seen in Italy. Calvi's driver dropped him off here around 9 p.m. on Thursday the 10th of June. When he came to pick up his boss the next morning to take him to work, Calvi's apartment was empty. Under cover of darkness, Calvi fled the country illegally and embarked on a last-ditch attempt to raise money to save his bank. He escaped Italy with a false passport, imaginatively forged in the name of Calvini. And then, 5 days later, Calvi landed in London in a private jet chartered by a solicitor as a favour to an old client.
He said, could I help in arranging a flight for an important Italian industrialist who wanted to come to London? In incognito, without it being clearly understood who he was going to see. It was that kind of business they were in.
Okay, so we know the story from there. Calvi was found hung under the Blackfriars Bridge. Marcinkus was, as we left the story, he was still in Phoenix as of 2010 until he turned up dead at the age, I think he was in his mid-80s. And the story still is unsolved as far as who killed Roberto Calvi. But one thing that is known is the Vatican connection to this scandal, money laundering connection, the bilking of millions and millions of dollars, and also the intrigue that first got me interested in this story as I was right there watching it unfold right before my very eyes, not really understanding much at the time about the Vatican's role in world affairs. I think in the second half hour, we're going to talk about, of course, the Jesuit Vatican New World Order and its connection to many, many dictators. Practically every right-wing dictator of recent periods has been born or brought up a Catholic, notably Hitler, Franco, Mussolini, Anton Pavlovich Tiso, especially. He was a Catholic priest. And we've got to talk a little bit about Joseph Stalin and his connection. And I think you'll find it quite interesting when you see the connections to all of these dictators, but yet the Vatican also has connections with every leader of the free world, supposedly. So they don't care. They work both sides of the fence in an effort to get their way, in an effort to create, like I said once before, a one world order, one world religion. And that's by no means something that you should look forward to, even though there are so many young globalists in America who are pushing for a one world, a beautiful world, how it would be great to be all together, no borders, etc. But really, what does that mean? And I'm telling you, it has a complete different meaning than that. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. This is Greg Anthony here, and go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com, and you can get shows going back well over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. Yes, that's what we discuss here, and it's a subject that sorely needs to be put in the mainstream as well as into the larger alternative media stations, but it just won't get there. And the reason is the people we talk about control those stations and those news outlets. And that, folks, is a fact. Otherwise, there's really no reason why this story shouldn't be told, because there's so much evidence that what we say here needs to be put on the table. You don't have to believe it. For example, at the end of the show, I mentioned that it's pretty interesting if you look at a lot of the big dictators in the world, like Mussolini, Stalin, and others. And I bet you if you started really looking closely, maybe we should do that at the North Korean dictator, you will find a Jesuit connection there. And that's something that you can look into. But let me tell you, that's quite interesting, isn't it? And so, at the break I mentioned that, and I know people will say, oh, you're crazy. And when I say that Joseph Stalin might as well be a Jesuit priest because he was trained at a Jesuit institution in Russia, and his connections are so blatant that people will then, I remember putting out the facts and said, look at these facts, prove them or disprove them, and if you disprove them, give me facts that show that they weren't true, and they will recite certain little history, the history that you get from the mainstream regarding Stalin. But I said, go a little deeper. Why don't you go to a story that I put out there a long time ago, regarding Father Edmund Walsh. He's passed away since, but he was the great educator from Georgetown University, right next to the White House, that created the School of Foreign Service that prepares most of our diplomats today to go out into the world and spread Jesuitism. Now, Father Walsh has a page still on President Eisenhower's website, which I find quite interesting, because when I called Georgetown a number of years ago, I asked him what was the reason for that, and they gave me, well, he's such a great teacher. And I said, well, there's a lot of great teachers in the world, but they usually don't get a page on a president's website unless they have a really deep connection. And they said, well, we don't know anything about that. Well, looking into it, you'll find that Father Walsh was more than just a great educator. You might as well consider him a CIA or operative or spy. He turns up in places like Japan, he turns up in the Middle East, in Iran, turns up in Iraq. This is years ago. Turns up that he brokered a deal going over with a suitcase full of American money when the Bolsheviks needed money to keep the revolution going. And communism is a Jesuit creation. And he went there brokering a deal, going there under the guise that the Catholic Church was bringing aid, financial aid to the poor in Russia who needed food. Now, we know what he really went there for, and that was to broker a deal to give the Bolsheviks more money to keep the war, keep this strife going on. But the deal was very simple. We'll give you this money, but we want Joseph Stalin to have a major role in the hierarchy of the Bolsheviks. And that's exactly what happened. And I was looking through people that were writing about this and ran across somebody named James Donahue, who had a little story of his own, and he mentioned that while he was digging through historical records to determine the feasibility of the legend that Hitler escaped to Argentina after the war, he came upon an interesting link between Stalin and the Catholic Church. Now, it seems that Stalin was not only a Catholic, but that he was most likely ordained a Jesuit priest before he became a ruthless communist dictator and a mass killer of untold millions. Some believe Stalin was responsible for more death and destruction, and he was, than Hitler, yet the Catholic Church never chose to excommunicate either one. Now, isn't that interesting? Because Hitler was Catholic. Why hasn't he been excommunicated? And why does the Concordat, which is an agreement, written agreement, between the Vatican and Germany and Hitler's Third Reich still exist today? Stalin's real name, it's tough. I can't begin to pronounce it. Joseph Vizinanovich, and it's spelled D-S-H-U-G-A-S-H-V-I-L-I. For obvious reasons, after becoming politically active, he changed his name to Stalin, or it was given to him, and that means made of steel. He was born to a relatively wealthy Catholic parents and attended a church-run school at Gori. He graduated at the top of his class in 1892, and I bet he was picked out of the bunch during that time. He then was accepted as a student at the Orthodox Seminary of Tiflis in Georgia, where he trained as a Jesuit priest. Now, anytime you're going to say that, you're going to get guys that write you and go, you're so crazy. That's not true. You guys are Nazis talking like that about Stalin. He was never trained as a Jesuit. And I said, okay, well, give me some facts. And that never seems to come. But the history books report that Christianity was banned in Russia under the communists, but this was not the case with the Jesuits. Quite interesting. Although they were publicly thrown out of the country, they still remained in Russian territory. But reportedly, they helped finance the First and Second World Wars. But that is another story to talk about. Stalin talked about his conversion to Marxism during an interview with journalist Emil Ludwig. And I remember finding this interview as well. And he said, quote, Jesuitical methods prevalent at the seminary were severe, and he became a revolutionary, a believer in Marxism, in protest to the outrageous regime he endured at school. Okay, he said that the Jesuits were systematic and persevering in working to achieve sordid ends, but their principal method is spying, prying, worming their way into people's souls and outraging their feelings. What good can there be in that? Now, in spite of his feeling, supposedly about the Jesuits. Stalin remained a star pupil there at the seminary and was ordained as a proper Jesuit after 7 years of study there. Isn't that interesting? How come you never hear about that in your normal history lessons? Because they cover it up. Now, the next thing about Stalin, when he first took over for the Bolsheviks, he was a wanted man many times by the Russian government and had to flee for his life. And guess where he would go get safe haven? At the Jesuit, the Jesuit institution at Tiflis. So in spite of this feeling, he was a deep down, hardcore Jesuit. He was a secret leader of the May Day uprising in 1901 and quickly moved up the rank among the revolutionaries. Now, the reason that he did... Where was I here? Sounds like I'm next to a construction site. But anyway, in spite of this feeling, that Stalin was trained there, and he also many times went for safe haven there. In the years of turmoil that followed the 1901 May Day uprising, Stalin was arrested and imprisoned in Siberia several times, but each time was mysteriously released or was escaped and returned to action with the Bolsheviks. In 1917, Stalin and Lenin founded Pravda, the official Bolshevik newspaper in St. Petersburg, which became a major tool of the revolution. Lenin and Stalin did not get along, and even though they were both active in the revolution, Lenin regarded Stalin as a double agent of the Jesuits because of Stalin's amazing luck at escaping execution in prison. Then in 1922, after the Bolsheviks won the Civil War and the Rothschilds and the American Jesuit bankers offered to finance the new Soviet Union if Stalin was given a key role, and that's exactly where Father Edmund Walsh, this American priest, comes into play, the priest at Georgetown who started the School of Foreign Service when he went over to Russia in the guise of bringing Catholic aid to the poor to broker a deal to make sure that Stalin was given power. And they said, okay, we'll finance the new Soviet Union and the revolution if Stalin was given a key role. Thus, Stalin was made General Secretary of the Central Committee, a springboard to his eventual position as head of the Soviets. Stalin's promotion set up a final showdown with Lenin. Lenin began planning to have Stalin eliminated. At the same time, Jesuit Superior General Vladimir Ledikowski from Poland gave an order to Stalin to have Lenin killed. Lenin died of poisoning on January 21st, 1924. The official word from Pravda was that Lenin died of syphilis. Thus, Stalin moved into the position of the undisputed ruler and mass murderer of the Soviet Union. Among his first acts was to outlaw Russian Orthodox Church. Isn't that amazing? Now, I could see why. If he was a Jesuit and he was working for the Vatican, the first thing they'd want to do is get rid of any opposing church, right? And so what did they do? They outlawed the Russian Orthodox Church. Thousands of churches and schools were seized and handed over to who? The Catholic Church. It's not very well known, but Stalin, like Hitler, launched the deportation of Jews to Siberian death camps, where to send tens of millions perished. The head of those camps was a Catholic Jesuit, Cardinal Gregory Agajanian. And this is interesting because I remember running into this story many times. And the connection of Agajanian, who was there at these death camps, he was a former student and classmate of Stalin at Tiflis, the Jesuit institution. So tell me why, if you got facts that show you that a Catholic Jesuit cardinal, Gregory Agajanian, was one of the major people at the death camps of Jews in Russia, and he was trained at a Catholic institution, Jesuit institution, with Stalin, why do we have any connection with these people here in America if they don't work together with the American government for the same end? And what is that end? What were they doing in Russia? They were killing off and mass murdering Orthodox Christians. in turning their churches over to the Vatican. And they were also mass murdering tens of millions of Jews in Siberia, doing exactly what Hitler was doing. Hitler's mentor was Pope Pius XII. So why is America in bed with these Jesuits? In fact, why are our diplomats trained at a Jesuit university if they're nothing but mass murderers? The reason is our government is lying to you. And it's that simple. But the problem is, no one's going to believe it. Now, another strange part of this story is that even though he was a fully ordained priest, although you're never going to see that in public, they're not going to come out and tell you that, right? Stalin was allowed to marry twice. There's no record that he was ever defrocked as a priest. Well, no, of course not. And it should be noted that Hitler also was a practicing Roman Catholic. And there seemed to be a strange involvement between both of these evil dictators and the Vatican and the Jesuits. And you know as well as I do, there's so much more to this eerie story that needs to be told. And the one real factor here that's interesting is that you can present fact after fact after fact that needs to be put on a table and discussed, and people will still not believe it. Okay, let's look into this story just a little deeper. We know that communism was another creation of the Jesuit order, and that was started in the Paraguay reductions in the 1600s. Okay, so like I was saying, that communism, another creation of the Jesuit order. One of the earliest acts, like I said, was Stalin beginning to outlaw the Russian Orthodox Church, and he allowing seizing of thousands of churches and schools to be handed over to the Catholic Church. It's a highly controversial program that has largely been unreported even to this day. And by 1939, the Russian Orthodox Church was all but extinct. Of the other persecutions, the Ukraine and the deportation of Jews is also infamous under his reign, in which tens of millions perished. What is rarely, if ever, published, and we talked about this, is that the head of the death camps, and I wanted to make this clear, the head of the death camps of Siberia, where all these Jews were killed, was a Catholic cardinal named Gregory Agajanian, and a former classmate of Jesuit at the Jesuit seminary with Stalin at Tiflis. You know, there's further and most disturbing note to this Catholic connection concerning the nature of the atrocities of Siberia. While it has been admitted by some historians that a number of concentration camps in Siberia had ovens to burn dead bodies, the lack of sufficient mass graves, even with the use of quicklime to destroy evidence, has been found. This implies that the use of ovens for body disposal must have been in frequent use across thousands of camps. Furthermore, that people were not dead when fed into the furnaces is something never reported. Unlike the Nazis, well, this is interesting because just one second here. Okay, so we got the construction zone under control. Sorry about that. Some construction going on near where I was broadcasting. Boy, I got to afford one of those soundproof rooms. But the idea, this story has come out sometimes, even in Nazi Germany, and the point is, were the people actually dead when they went into the gas chamber, when they went into the ovens? And there's stories that tell us that this was a satanic ritual where these people were actually alive when they went into the ovens, and the gas only put them to sleep. Very interesting story, and they're talking about this both in Russia and in Germany. You know, tens of millions of people were burnt alive under satanic Vatican rituals in Siberia, at least 3 times those of Catholic dictator Hitler, and not a single book accounting for these major anomalies has made the light of day. Very interesting, isn't it? What about Joseph Stalin, the Vatican agent? But anyway, practically, like we said earlier, practically every right-wing dictator of the period has been born and brought up a Catholic. I mentioned Hitler, Franco, Mussolini, Anton Pavlik, Tiso, and Stalin, of course, was brought up in the house of a Catholic priest with his Catholic mother, went to Catholic school, etc. And as we went through the story of Stalin, let's look a little closer at what this really implies. Tens of millions of people burnt alive. Towards the end of his life, there appears a major falling out between Stalin and the Vatican, with Stalin ordering extraordinary suppression orders against the Catholic Church in his final year. And this could be a ruse as well, to, basically to take away any credibility, if you might add, of someone saying, well, look, Stalin was a card-carrying Jesuit. Oh, no, he wasn't. Look what he did to the Catholic Church. And you got to think of it in those terms. Now, in Yugoslavia, there was, we know the devil of Jasenovic ran the Jasenovic concentration camp. He was a Franciscan, where estimates killed from 49,600 to 600,000. All citizens were forced to convert, and those who refused were killed. And that was Miroslav Filipovic, Franciscan, who was the head of the Ustasi. One Catholic priest wrote the clergy should put down the prayer book and take up the revolvers, Stalin and Castro. That's in the Jesuit connection. Castro shaking hands. You can see it here. I'm looking with his boss, Grand Master and Prince of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Castro's connections to the Vatican are also there. And the facts are that the Vatican and their Jesuits were deeply involved in fomenting World War I, but also World War II. And during World War II, the Vatican supported not only Nazi Germany, but also other fascist regimes in Europe, such as Mussolini's fascist Italy and the Catholic fascist state of Croatia. In fact, Roman Catholic Knight of Malta Franz von Papen and the Roman Catholic Centrum Party in Bavaria put Hitler into power. On the other side of the European continent, we find a Jesuit-trained monster named Stalin, like I mentioned, running the Soviet Union. So really, folks, they're everywhere, right? And nobody ever talks about it. Fidel Castro was born in the village of Bryan in Cuba on August 13, 1926, into a rich family, the son of Angel Castro, who was a Spanish immigrant, and his cook, Lina Ruz Gonzalez. In his early life, Castro went to Jesuit schools, and from there he attended a Jesuit preparatory school in Havana. Similar story, they're always going to these Jesuit schools. Controlled opposition Castro was trained in Jesuit schools for 7 years, put in power by Jesuits Knights of Malta, controlled Skull and Bones, CIA, and advised by Jesuit Father Armando Lorente during the Revolution. Today, Castro, he continued for a long time, being the subservient 78th Grand Master of the Prince of Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Interesting. And the life of Castro has always been bound up with prophecies, some of them strangely accurate. Probably most known is the one made by Jesuit Father Antonio Lorente, Castro's teacher and spiritual advisor at the Jesuit College of Belen. Castro, he says, is a man of destiny, prophesies the Jesuit priest Lorente. Behind him is the hand of God. He has the mission to fulfill, and he will fulfill it against all obstacles. Well, anyway, let's see how much time we have here. Okay, we got about a minute and a half. But what you see is if you can get control of these people, put in your man, you constantly are going to have these wars that are orchestrated. The strife in Cuba, the strife in Russia, in the World War II, in the Nazi movement. There's always an enemy, correct? And it's interesting that the Jesuits are always on both sides of the coin. They're controlling the Nazi movement as well as working hand in glove with the Americans in World War II. And they say about Castro, the student is involved with a gang or an antisocial group on the fringe of peer acceptance. Yes, it has been extensively documented that as soon as he joined Berlin, he formed his own gang and began harassing other students. The Jesuit padres were terrorized. They had never seen a student like Castro. He continued his involvement with gangs when he became a law student at the University of Havana. So his Jesuit connection goes back a long, long way. Well, I hope they don't knock down the building. But anyway, we're all out of time today on the Investigative Journal. We'll see you tomorrow. Go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. Listen to First Amendment Radio. See you tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.